The setup. The night was still in the small town of Brooksville, Virginia. The faint hum of streetlights echoed through the empty roads, their flickering glow barely illuminating the worn pavement. The town, a quiet and unremarkable place, was the kind of community where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were buried deep beneath years of small-town tradition. But tonight, something was different. A black luxury sedan rolled smoothly down the deserted road, its engine barely making the sound. Behind the wheel sat Ava Sinclair, her hand steady, her gaze sharp as she navigated the familiar streets. The vehicle's tinted windows reflected the neon glow of the occasional roadside diner and the dim headlights of the few cars still out at this hour. Ava was in the final phase of her mission. For months, she had worked undercover, unraveling a corruption network operating within the Brooksville Police Department. She had spent weeks quietly collecting evidence, hidden camera footage, transaction records, conversations whispered between officers who thought they were untouchable. She had almost everything she needed. Tonight was supposed to be her last night in Brooksville. She exhaled, adjusting the Bluetooth earpiece hidden beneath her braided hair. The familiar voice of Jackson Rains, her handler at the CIA, crackled through. "Status update," he asked, his voice cool and professional. "Heading home now. Everything's secure. I'll be on a flight to D.C. by morning." "Good. We'll have a team waiting at Langley." "You did good, Sinclair. Just keep a low profile till wheels up." Ava smirked. Low profile had always been her specialty. She turned left at a stop sign, the only car on the road. The streetlights above cast faint shadows across her dashboard. Her exit was just a few blocks away. Then the flashing lights appeared. Red and blue. The sharp wail of a police siren shattered the stillness of the night. Ava's grip on the wheel tightened. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't missed a stop sign. "Stay calm," she muttered under her breath, slowing down and pulling over to the side of the road. She watched in her rearview mirror as a Brooksville PD squad car rolled to a stop behind her. Two officers emerged. The driver, Officer Darren Mills, was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform neatly pressed, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. The second officer, Lucas Grady, was stockier, his presence exuding quiet arrogance. He had the air of someone who had done this kind of thing before, many times, and had never been questioned. Ava kept her face neutral. "They don't know who I am. Yet." Officer Mills approached first, his flashlight cutting through the dim interior of her car. The beam swept over her face, her hands, the black leather seats. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "License and registration." Ava didn't hesitate. She reached toward her glove compartment, slowly, deliberately, retrieving the necessary documents. She handed them over without a word. Officer Mills studied her license. His eyes lingered on it for a fraction too long before exchanging a glance with Grady. "You from around here?" Mills asked. "I'm on a work trip," Ava replied, keeping her voice level. Grady stepped around to the passenger side, his flashlight now sweeping the back seat. "That's so. What kind of work you do?" "Consulting." The answer was vague, purposefully so. Grady smirked. "Consulting? Huh. Sounds fancy." Mills lowered the license, looking directly at Ava now. "Do you know why we pulled you over tonight?" "No, officer." "Failed to stop at that sign back there." Ava's brow furrowed. "That's a lie." She had stopped. She was sure of it. Years of field work had trained her to notice everything, including the way these two officers were now watching her, like wolves sizing up their prey. "I'm certain I stopped," she said carefully. Mills' smirk didn't waver. "Well, I saw it different. Step out of the vehicle, Mom." Ava's pulse remained steady, but internally she was analyzing every possibility. This isn't a routine stop. They're up to something. She forced a polite smile, reaching for the door handle. "Of course. But before I do, may I ask why?" Mills tilted his head. We have reason to believe there's something in your vehicle that shouldn't be. Ava's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. In the reflection, she saw Grady step toward her trunk, a small black bag suddenly in his hand. Her stomach turned. There it is. They were framing her. A chill of calculation ran down her spine. They thought she was just another nobody, a black woman alone on a deserted road, with no one to call and no way to fight back. Get out of the car, Mills ordered again, his hand now resting on his holstered gun. Ava moved slowly, exiting the vehicle with controlled grace. She kept her hands visible, careful not to give them any excuse to escalate. Hands where I can see them, Grady said, circling back toward her. We'll make this easy. Mills stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough for only her to hear. You cooperate, and this doesn't have to get messy. You resist? Well, let's just say no one's gonna believe your side of things. Ava's lips parted in the faintest ghost of a smile. You're making a mistake, officer, she said softly. Grady let out a bark of laughter. You all say that. Mills smirked. Let's see how confident you are in front of a judge. Then, without hesitation, he spun her around, gripping her wrists and snapping cold steel handcuffs around them. Ava allowed it, because what these officers didn't realize, what they couldn't have known, was that she was already playing a different game. Brooksville PD had just arrested a CIA operative, and they had no idea what was about to happen next. The reckoning begins. The flashing red and blue lights danced across the darkened pavement, casting shifting shadows as Officer Mills tightened the handcuffs around Ava Sinclair's wrists. The metal bit into her skin, not painfully, but with enough force to make a statement. This was power. This was control. At least, that's what he thought. Ava let out a slow, steady breath, her face unreadable. She had been in far worse situations before. Kidnapped in Yemen, interrogated in Moscow, dodging bullets in Caracas. But this was almost laughable. These men didn't know what they had just done. And that made all the difference. Framed for a crime that never happened. Officer Lucas Grady opened the trunk with a slow, practiced motion, as if already savoring the performance. The planted black duffel bag sat near the edge, unzipped just enough for a white, powdery substance to be visible. Cocaine, at least, that's what they wanted it to look like. Well, Grady said, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. Looks like you've been busy, Miss Consultant. Mills shook his head, clicking his tongue like a disappointed parent. And here I thought you were just a hard-working woman trying to make a living. Ava didn't move, her face unreadable. She could see their game. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. They had done this before. To others. And they had gotten away with it. Is this the part where you tell me you just happened to find it? She asked, her voice calm. Grady's grin faltered just a little. Oh, she's a smart one, huh? Mills chuckled, shaking his head. That's cute, but not smart enough to avoid getting caught. Ava looked at the bag again. It had been planted clumsily. If they were better at this, they wouldn't have left it in such an obvious position. No, they wanted it to be obvious. They wanted her to panic, to beg, to play the role they had scripted for her. She refused. I want my lawyer, she said smoothly. Grady scoffed. Oh, sweetheart, you think this is some kind of civil rights documentary. He patted the trunk. I hate to break it to you, but with the amount of product we just found, you're not walking away from this. Ava tilted her head slightly, watching him. That depends. Depends on what? Mills asked, his patience starting to thin. On how long you think you can keep this charade up before it all comes crashing down. For a fraction of a second, Mills' expression flickered, just a little. Uncertainty. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Save it for the judge. Grady yanked her toward the squad car, shoving her into the back seat. She didn't resist, didn't struggle. She let them play out their little routine. For now. The car door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Ava stared out the window as the vehicle began to move. The rookie mistake these officers had just made. They assumed she was alone. The ride to the station. A silent war. The inside of the police cruiser was claustrophobic, the metal grate separating the front and back seats cutting off most of her view. The police radio buzzed intermittently, dispatch calling out locations and minor disturbances around town. Mills drove. Grady sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at her. Ava sat still, watching them. Studying. Grady adjusted the rearview mirror so he could look at her directly. His smirk returned. "You got anything to say now, Miss Consultant?" Silence. "Nothing. Not even a little please, sir. I swear I'm innocent." He chuckled. "Come on, give me something. I like it when they beg." Ava's lips barely parted into a half smile. "That's the thing about corrupt cops," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "You always assume the people you target are powerless, that they have no options, no connections." She tilted her head slightly. "No one coming for them." Grady's grin froze for just a moment. She saw it, and she knew he felt it, the first seed of doubt. "You think you're special, lady," Mills muttered from the driver's seat. Ava leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes locked onto his reflection in the rearview mirror. "No, but I know you made a mistake." Mills scoffed. "We don't make mistakes." Ava gave a slow nod, her gaze never wavering. "I know. That's why I'm still waiting for you to realize that I let you arrest me." Grady turned in his seat. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Ava glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. "It means," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "you have exactly 3 minutes before my people find out where I am." Silence. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For the first time, she saw the shift. The uncertainty in Mills' grip on the wheel. The slight tension in Grady's shoulders. "Bullshit," Mills said, but his voice lacked the confidence from earlier. Ava just smiled. And waited. Outside, the dark road stretched ahead, streetlights flickering in the distance. The police radio crackled to life. "Unit 17, we have a query from the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding an Ava Sinclair. Over." The officers froze. Ava's smile widened. Well, well," she murmured. "Would you look at that? 3 minutes exactly." Mills and Grady exchanged a glance, not of amusement, not of arrogance. Of fear. The radio continued. "Unit 17, be advised, FBI request is flagged as urgent. Do you have the suspect in custody? Over." Mills cursed under his breath. Grady's jaw clenched. They can't be serious. Ava leaned back against the seat, tilting her head as she watched their panic set in. "This is the part where you start wondering who the hell I actually am," she said smoothly. The radio crackled again. "Unit 17, respond. Over." Silence. Then, Ava saw it. The shift in Mills' grip on the steering wheel. The way Grady's hand twitched toward his holster. They weren't panicking because they thought she was a criminal. They were panicking because they were realizing she wasn't. Ava's smile faded. "You just figured it out, didn't you?" Mills slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, the car jerking forward as Ava's body was thrown slightly against the seatbelt. Everything went still. She looked up. Mills was breathing hard, his hands gripping the wheel. Grady turned slowly in his seat. For the first time, he wasn't smirking anymore. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Ava exhaled slowly. "You'll find out soon enough." The radio crackled again. "Brooksville PD, this is the FBI. We are en route to your location. Stand by." And just like that, the reckoning had begun. The trap closes. The squad car sat motionless on the side of the road, its tires still smoking from the sudden stop. The flashing red and blue lights cast erratic shadows against the dark Virginia woods. Inside, the silence was thick, a vacuum of tension ready to explode. Officer Darren Mills gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had gone bone white. His breathing was ragged, his eyes flickering between the rearview mirror and the police radio that had just sealed his fate. Next to him, Lucas Grady sat frozen, the muscles in his jaw twitching. He had his hand on his gun, not quite drawing it, but ready, just in case. Ava Sinclair, still cuffed in the back seat, tilted her head slightly, watching them. They weren't arrogant anymore. They weren't smirking. They were terrified. And that was when she knew she had them. They knew she wasn't just another victim. The radio crackled again. Brooksville PD, this is the FBI. Repeat, do you have the suspect in custody? Stand by for federal intervention. Over. Mills squeezed his eyes shut for a brief second before ripping the radio from its receiver. Dispatch, confirm suspect in custody, he muttered. His voice was tight, strained, as if he could choke on the words. We'll bring her to the station immediately. There was a long pause. Too long. Then, negative, Unit 17. New orders from headquarters. Hold your position. Federal agents will meet you at your location. Ava inhaled slowly, watching them unravel. She could almost hear their thoughts now. If the FBI was already involved, it meant this wasn't just a bad arrest. This wasn't just a mistake. They had just been caught. Grady whipped around in his seat, his dark eyes now filled with something raw. Who the hell are you? He hissed. Ava held his gaze, her silence louder than any words. She could see it in him, the growing panic, the moment when a man like him realizes he's been played. He thought he was the hunter. But now, he was just another cornered animal. We need to do something. Mills started. Like what? Grady snapped. You wanna just hand her over to the feds. You know what happens then, right? You know what she tells them. Ava let out a breath. There it is. The fear of exposure. They didn't care that they had framed her. They cared about who she could expose. It's already over, she said softly, her voice like a scalpel cutting through their panic. The only question is how bad you want it to be. Grady clenched his teeth. You shut your damn mouth. But Mills wasn't listening anymore. Ava saw the exact moment when his cop instincts, corrupt or not, started calculating. And then, just like that, his breathing slowed, his grip on the steering wheel relaxed. He turned slightly, his eyes narrowing at Ava. Maybe it's not over. Grady blinked. What? Maybe, Mills continued, ignoring him. We fix this before the feds get here. Ava watched them exchange a look. She didn't need to be a mind reader to know what was about to happen. They were about to make a bigger mistake. They weren't going to let her walk out of this. Grady's expression darkened. He understood exactly what Mills was suggesting. But something about it made him hesitate. This is dangerous, he muttered. Mills turned fully now, his voice low, urgent. We let her walk into the station. We're done. You get that, right? They start digging into our records, pulling tapes, calling lawyers. Then it's not just us. His voice dropped lower. It's all of them. Grady's eyes flickered with understanding. Brooksville PD wasn't just a couple of bad cops. It was a system, a network, and that meant powerful people had something to lose. We fix this now, Mills repeated. We get rid of her. We plant evidence that sticks, something the feds can't argue with. And if that doesn't work, he glanced back at Ava, his eyes cold. We make sure she never talks. The words settled like poison in the car. Ava kept her face calm, expression unreadable, but inside, her mind was spinning at high speed. There it is, the moment they crossed the line. This wasn't just corruption anymore. It was survival. Grady licked his lips, his indecision clear. You sure about this? He muttered. Mills exhaled sharply, as if shaking off whatever doubt still clung to him. You think anyone's gonna protect us if we let her go? Grady swallowed. Then he nodded. That was all Mills needed. Time to flip the script. Ava let her body go slack, her head tilting slightly, watching them through half-lidded eyes. They thought she was trapped. They thought she had nowhere to go. They were dead wrong. She shifted her cuffed hands slightly, enough to press a single hidden button sewn into her jacket sleeve. A signal. A silent, encrypted distress beacon. One that was already being received. 10 miles away, in a black SUV, Agent Jackson Rains, her CIA handler, looked down at the sudden flashing light on his encrypted laptop screen. A single word appeared in bold red. Engage. Jackson's mouth set in a hard line. She just gave the signal. The agents in the SUV immediately snapped into action, pulling weapons from holsters, loading magazines. Move in, Jackson ordered. Now. Back inside the squad car, Mills and Grady didn't notice a thing. They were too busy planning how to make Ava disappear. We head to the warehouse by the docks, Mills was saying. We drop some extra kilos in her car. Make sure the security footage sees her there. By the time the feds show up, they'll be dealing with a whole new problem. Grady nodded, swallowing hard. And if she resists? Mills' silence said everything. Grady sighed. All right, let's do it. Ava inhaled slowly. Now or never. She shifted slightly in her seat, making sure Mills caught the movement. He did. What the hell are you smirking at? He snapped. Ava met his eyes. You were too late. Mills frowned. What? Then the first black SUV screeched to a stop behind them. Before either officer could even process what was happening, the night exploded. Bright headlights, the sound of multiple car doors slamming open, the unmistakable click of weapons being drawn. A commanding voice shattered the air. Brooksville PD. Hands. In the air. Now. Mills' eyes widened. Grady's hand jumped to his gun. But it was already over. Ava smiled coldly, leaning back in her seat as she watched their world collapse around them. She had given them every chance. And still, they had chosen the wrong move. Told you, she murmured as red laser dots danced across their chests. Too late. The collapse begins. The air crackled with tension, thick with the weight of impending disaster. The squad car sat immobile, its tires still warm from the sudden stop. The flashing red and blue lights of the Brooksville PD were drowned out by something far more terrifying. The cold precision of the federal response. Outside, blinding headlights bathed the road in harsh white light, casting stretched shadows of the men inside the police cruiser. The unmistakable silhouette of armed federal agents moved in calculated formation, weapons raised, bodies poised for action. Ava Sinclair sat in the back seat, still handcuffed, still silent, but no longer trapped. This was exactly what she wanted. Officer Darren Mills had a death grip on the steering wheel, his breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. Sweat glistened at his hairline, his mind racing through every terrible possibility. Next to him, Lucas Grady wasn't much better. His hand hovered dangerously close to his weapon, his knuckles taut with tension. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else. They had seconds to decide. Surrender, or go down in flames. Mills exhaled shakily. He wasn't ready to throw in the towel. Not yet. This is bad, Grady whispered, his voice strangled with fear. Shut up, Mills shot back, but his voice lacked authority now. They both knew it. They had faked evidence before. They had buried people under false charges. They had always walked away clean. But now the FBI was outside their car, their entire world crumbling in real time. No backup was coming. No higher-ups to shield them. For the first time in their pathetic, corrupt lives, they were alone. And that was when Ava finally spoke. I told you, she murmured, her voice cool as steel. Both men whipped their heads toward her. What the hell did you just say? Mills hissed. Ava leaned forward slightly, her wrists still bound, but her posture relaxed, as if she were the one in control now. I told you you were too late. She glanced at the red laser dots that now painted their chests. I told you this would happen. Grady's jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. You set us up. Ava let out a breathless chuckle, shaking her head. No, Officer Grady, you set yourselves up. I just made sure you couldn't get away with it this time. Grady's hand twitched toward his gun, but Mills caught it before he could do anything stupid. No, Mills barked. They'll shoot us. Just put your hands up. Grady turned toward him, eyes wild. Are you kidding me? You think they're just gonna let us walk? Mills' throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his mind battling between pride and self-preservation. Then, the voice outside came again, cutting through the night like a blade. Mills, Grady, step out of the vehicle with your hands, where we can see them. There was no time left. Mills exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. We go out there, he said, voice low and desperate, and we say she's a criminal. We say we caught her red-handed. We stick to the story. We. Are you serious? Grady snapped. That ship has sailed. They don't show up like this unless they already know. Mills turned back toward Ava, and that's when he saw it. The look in her eyes. Not fear. Not desperation. Just pure certainty. Like someone who already knew how this would end. Like someone who had planned for this moment from the start. Mills' stomach plummeted. Oh my God, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Grady blinked. What? Mills stared at Ava. She wanted this. Ava smirked. Took you long enough to figure it out. Before either man could respond, the driver's side window exploded. Boom. The crack of a flashbang grenade erupted outside, filling the night with a blinding burst of light and sound. Mills screamed, clutching his ears as his vision whited out. Grady jerked violently in his seat, his gun falling from his grip. And Ava. She closed her eyes calmly, letting the shockwave pass over her. The takedown. The car doors were yanked open simultaneously. Hands grabbed Mills and Grady, ripping them from their seats. Down. Do not resist. The voices were sharp, unrelenting. Mills felt his face slam against the pavement, his hands wrenched behind his back. Grady flailed for half a second, until the cold steel of a gun barrel was pressed against his skull. Move again, and you do untgetack into warning. The two officers were flipped onto their backs, their own handcuffs snapping around their wrists. The moment was deliciously ironic. Ava stepped out of the back seat as Agent Jackson Rains appeared in front of her, his expression tight. You good? He asked. Ava nodded. Took you long enough. Jackson huffed. Next time, don't let yourself get arrested. She smirked. Next time, tell your agents to move faster. The fall of Brooksville PD. The arrest of Darren Mills and Lucas Grady sent shockwaves through the Brooksville Police Department. Within hours, federal subpoenas were issued. Within days, the station was under full-blown investigation. The corruption wasn't just two bad cops. It was half the department. Fabricated drug busts, planted evidence, false reports. They had targeted minorities, poor families, vulnerable individuals, because they thought no one would question them. Because for years, no one had. Until now. Ava stood in a federal operations center, watching Grady and Mills booking photos flash across the monitors. MUGSOT, Mills, Darren, Officer, age 38. MUGSOT, Grady, Lucas, Officer, age 41. Below their images, in bold red letters, was a single word. Charged. Ava crossed her arms, satisfaction settling deep in her chest. "You did good, Sinclair," Jackson murmured, standing next to her. She smirked. "I always do." The storm wasn't just over. It had washed away everything corrupt in its path. And Ava, she was already moving on to the next fight, because there was always another storm coming. The domino effect. Brooksville was burning, not with fire, but with something far worse. Truth. By morning, the entire police department was in chaos. Phones rang off the hook. Officers whispered in hushed, panicked voices. Lawyers flooded into the station like a second wave of invasion. Half the department was scrambling for cover, while the other half was staring at each other in terrified silence, as if finally realizing the system they had upheld was collapsing beneath their feet. For years, they had operated in the shadows, planting drugs, falsifying reports, sending innocent people to prison for crimes that never happened. But now, the shadows were gone, and there was nowhere left to hide. Brooksville PD, the beginning of the end. Ava Sinclair watched it all unfold from a secure federal observation room, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that was already growing cold. Behind the reinforced glass, officers paced in agitation, their voices barely muffled by the thick security walls. "This is a witch hunt," one officer growled. "They've got nothing." Another snapped, slamming a fist against a desk. "Mills and Grady got sloppy. That's on them. But the rest of us, they can't prove anything." But Ava smirked. They could prove everything. And soon, they would. Jackson Raines stood next to her, arms crossed, his usual no-nonsense expression in place. "Brooksville's about to lose a lot of cops," he muttered. Ava took a slow sip of her coffee. "Good." Jackson gave her a sidelong look. "You almost sound happy about it." "That's because I am." She didn't bother hiding it. People like Mills and Grady, they deserved every second of what was coming. But it wasn't just about them anymore. The entire department was under investigation. The FBI had issued sweeping warrants, digging into past arrests, financial records, body cam footage that had mysteriously gone missing. This was the kind of storm that didn't just pass. This was the kind that left nothing standing. And Ava, she was the one who set it in motion. "You think we'll get them all?" Jackson asked. Ava tapped her fingers against the coffee cup, her eyes still trained on the chaos outside the observation window. "No," she admitted, "but we'll get enough." Because that was how systems fell. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Interrogation Room 1. Cracks in the armor. Inside a cold, windowless interrogation room, Officer Darren Mills sat shackled to the table, his face pale, sweat dotting his hairline. His lawyer sat next to him, stiff and silent. Across from them, Agent Daniel Price sat with a folder thick enough to break a jaw, flipping through pages with lazy precision. "Let's go over this one more time," Price said, not looking up. Mills exhaled through his nose. "I want a deal." Price finally looked up. "A deal," he repeated, tilting his head. "That's adorable. You think you're in a position to negotiate." Mills swallowed hard, his bravado flickering. "You need me," he muttered. "You want names. I got names." Price leaned forward slightly. "You think we don't already have them?" Mills opened his mouth, then closed it again. Price slid a photo across the table. It was Grady's mugshot, his former partner, now sitting in a cell somewhere else in the building, his eyes hollowed out, his face crumbling under the weight of what was coming. "Your buddy already gave us a full statement." Price smirked. "Signed. Confessed. Spilled everything." Mills' breath hitched. "You're lying." Price reached into the folder, pulled out a typed confession, neatly signed at the bottom. Mills' stomach dropped. Price leaned back, voice casual. "Now the only question is, do you want to go down with him, or do you want to start talking?" Mills' mouth went dry. He was trapped, and he knew it. The whistleblower, Officer James Keller. Outside the interrogation rooms, Rookie Officer James Keller sat at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen. He had been the first one to realize something was wrong. He had sent the first email that triggered the investigation. And now he was waiting for the fallout. Ava appeared beside him, leaning against his desk. "You did the right thing," she said. Keller scoffed. "Then why does it feel like I just shot myself in the foot?" Ava studied him for a moment. "Because sometimes doing the right thing hurts." Keller let out a breath, rubbing his temples. "What happens now?" "Now." Ava glanced toward the interrogation rooms. "Now the rats start turning on each other." Keller followed her gaze, watching as lawyers paced outside, voices sharp, tempers high. "And after that?" he asked. Ava smiled faintly. "We burn the rest of it down." The media frenzy. The story blows open. By the time night fell, the story had gone national. Brooksville PD corruption exposed. FBI investigation underway, dozens of cases called into question as officers face charges, planted evidence, false arrests, and systemic abuse. What went wrong? Brooksville's streets were quiet, but inside every household, bar, and office, the news blared. People who had once trusted the police blindly were now questioning everything. Former suspects were coming forward, claiming they had been set up. Families of those wrongly convicted were demanding justice. And Ava? She was already planning her next move. The final play. One last loose end. Deep in the FBI's high-security detention center, Lucas Grady sat alone. He had already signed a confession. He had already given up Mills. He had told them everything. But there was one thing he hadn't said yet. He sat still, staring at the one-way mirror in front of him. Then he leaned forward. "I want to make a deal." A soft click echoed in the room as the door opened. Agent Price stepped inside. "The deal," he repeated, amused. Grady nodded. "I want full immunity. In exchange, I give you something bigger." Price's smile faltered. Grady leaned closer. "You think Brooksville is the only department running like this?" The room fell silent. Grady let out a slow breath. "I can give you the names of 10 more departments running the same scam." Ava watched through the one-way mirror, her pulse steady. She knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The rot runs deeper. The storm that had started in Brooksville had now spread beyond its borders. It wasn't just about 2 bad cops anymore. It wasn't even just about one corrupt police department. It was about a network. Ava Sinclair had seen corrupt systems before, in war zones, in dictatorships, in criminal enterprises that pretended to be legitimate institutions. But this was something else entirely. And it was far from over. Lucas Grady's offer. Pandora's box opens. Inside a heavily fortified FBI safe house, Lucas Grady sat at a steel interrogation table, his wrists bound in front of him, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold at his side. His face was hollow, his usual arrogance gone. He knew he was screwed, but if he played this right, maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't rot in a cell for the rest of his life. Across from him, Agent Daniel Price sat with his arms crossed, his eyes cold. Ava leaned against the wall, watching. "So let me get this straight," Price said slowly, flipping through a freshly typed report. "You're saying Brooksville PD wasn't working alone?" Grady licked his lips, nodding. "That's right. And you can name other departments." Grady exhaled. "Not just departments. People. I know who's getting paid. I know which prosecutors are covering for them. I know how the money moves." Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. She wasn't sure if he was bluffing. But the way his hands trembled, the way his pupils flickered between fear and desperation, it told her something. He was telling the truth. "And what do you want in exchange?" Price asked. Grady leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Immunity." Price let out a low chuckle. "You think you deserve a free pass." Grady's eyes snapped to him. Sharp, desperate. "If I don't talk, you'll never take them down. I was small time, man. But the people I worked for. He shook his head. They're on another level. Ava stepped forward, finally speaking. Who's at the top? Grady hesitated. Ava studied him. Then, in a soft, almost amused voice, she asked, Are you afraid? Grady's breath hitched. Ava saw it. The way his fingers tightened slightly. The way his eyes flicked toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst through it any second. He was scared to death. And that meant something. I'll tell you everything, he muttered. But I need witness protection. I need a guarantee I won't end up in a ditch somewhere. Ava and Price exchanged a glance, because for the first time in this entire investigation, something was clear. Brooksville wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The bigger picture, the FBI moves in. By the time dawn broke, the FBI had launched a full-scale federal probe into police corruption networks across the state. More sealed indictments were issued. More subpoenas went out. And as the evidence stacked up, something became painfully clear. This wasn't just about police corruption. This was about power, money, politics, a system built on lies. The judge who looked the other way. A week later, in a high-rise federal building, a new name surfaced. Judge Henry Calloway, a hardliner judge with a reputation for throwing the book at drug offenders. Except, Grady's testimony had revealed something disturbing. Calloway had thrown the book at innocent people the police framed. And in return, he had been receiving payments. His signature was on dozens of wrongful convictions, cases that now reeked of fabrication. Brooksville PD hadn't just been arresting innocent people. They had been sending them away for life. Ava sat in a dimly lit FBI war room, staring at a wall covered in photos, financial records, and news clippings. Price stood next to her. It's deeper than we thought, he admitted. Ava nodded, her mind turning like a machine. How many of these cases can we overturn? Price hesitated. That's the problem. He reached for a file, flipping it open. A lot of these people already serve years behind bars. Some, they didn't make it. Ava felt a slow burn in her chest. A different kind of anger. Not just at the cops who framed them. Not just at the system that protected them. But at the people who suffered for it. How do we take Calloway down? She asked. Price exhaled. We need hard proof. Witnesses. Financial records. Anything that ties him directly. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. Then let's get to work. Judge Calloway's secrets. Ava knew men like Calloway. He was the type of man who shook hands in public, then signed death warrants behind closed doors. She had taken down dictators with less power than him. So she started digging. And what she found? It was worse than she expected. Calloway had been laundering money through private prisons. He owned stakes in the same facilities he was sending people to. Every conviction filled his pockets, and every wrongful conviction was a business decision. The warning. Ava wasn't surprised when the warning came. It was late at night, her apartment dimly lit by the glow of her laptop screen. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Walk away, Sinclair. Ava smirked. Or what? A pause. You don't want to find out. Ava leaned back in her chair. I think I do. A long silence. Then, the call ended. She stared at the phone for a second. Then she stood up, grabbing her gun off the table. If they thought she was scared, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The storm hadn't passed. It was just getting started. The reckoning. The city skyline loomed in the distance, dark and unbothered by the storm brewing beneath its surface. But Ava Sinclair was far from unbothered. She had spent years in the field, dismantling cartels, warlords, intelligence leaks. But this was something different. This was home. And it was rotting from the inside out. The Brooksville PD scandal had been the first crack in the dam. The revelations about Judge Henry Calloway had widened it. But now, the dam was breaking, and the people responsible, they were desperate to stop it. Ava wasn't afraid of desperate men. She was afraid of what they would do to keep their secrets buried. The target on Ava's back. The first real warning came the morning after the phone call. A black SUV had been parked outside her apartment building. Unmarked, tinted windows, engine idling, watching, waiting. She pretended not to notice, but she saw everything. The second warning was louder. A car tailed her on the way to a meeting with Agent Price. At first, it was subtle. Too subtle. Not an amateur. Not a random thug. Someone trained. Someone who knew what they were doing. When she pulled into a parking garage, the tail kept going past. But she had already memorized the license plate. She sent it to Price. 10 minutes later, she had an answer. "The car is registered to a shell company," he said. Ava smirked. "Let me guess, linked to Calloway." "Not directly," Price admitted, "but close enough to make me uncomfortable." Ava leaned back in her car seat, staring at the city skyline through her windshield. "They know we're coming for them." Price was silent for a beat. "Yeah, and they're scared." Ava exhaled. "Good. Judge Calloway. Untouchable, no more." The final play came in the form of a sealed federal indictment. After weeks of covered investigations, witness testimonies, and financial forensics, the FBI had finally put together an airtight case. Calloway had been laundering money through private prison contracts. Every conviction he handed down meant cash in his pocket. Every innocent person he sent away was just another dollar sign. And worse, he had been working with police departments across the state to keep the pipeline going. Brooksville was just the tip of the iceberg. Price handed Ava the final dossier. "This is it," he said. Ava flipped through the pages, eyes sharp. "What's the move?" "We arrest him at his house. Quiet. Controlled. No press yet." Ava raised an eyebrow. "No press." Price hesitated. "We don't want to tip off his friends in high places. If he goes down, we need him to take the rest of them with him." Ava considered that. Then she slid the folder back to him. "You won't get him quietly." Price frowned. "Why not?" Ava smirked. "Because he already knows we're coming." The raid. The federal strike team moved in before dawn. Ava stood in a surveillance van, watching the live feed from body cams as agents approached Judge Calloway's mansion. It was a fortress, 3 stories, security gates, private guards. But it didn't matter. They had a warrant. And a plan. "Move in," Price commanded over the radio. The team breached the front gate, moving in tight formation. Ava watched the infrared cameras. But something felt off. Too quiet. Too easy. Then, the first shot rang out. Contact. Contact. An agent's voice exploded over the comms. Ava's stomach dropped. On the screen, gunfire erupted from the upper balcony of the house. Security wasn't running. They were fighting back. Judge Calloway had been expecting them. Ava ripped off her headset, shoving the van doors open. "We need to go in. Now." Price grabbed her arm. "This is a live scene, Sinclair." Ava shook him off. "You think I'm gonna sit here while that bastard tries to shoot his way out?" And just like that, she was moving. Calloway's last stand. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with smoke and gunpowder. Agents had breached the lower floors, taking down Calloway's hired security one by one. But the judge himself, he was holed up in his office, refusing to surrender. Ava stormed inside, her weapon raised. "Calloway," she shouted. "It's over." The room was dark, the windows covered. Then, a click. The desk lamp flicked on. Judge Henry Calloway sat behind his desk, his hands folded neatly, his face calm. He wasn't armed. He wasn't running. He was smiling. "Agent Sinclair," he murmured. "I was wondering when you'd get here." Ava's finger tightened on the trigger. Don't move. Calloway chuckled. Oh, I'm not going anywhere. But you? He leaned back slightly. I wonder if you understand what you've really done. Ava narrowed her eyes. Enlighten me. Calloway exhaled, shaking his head almost sadly. You think this ends with me? Ava didn't respond. You think I'm the king of this empire? Calloway tilted his head. I was just a middleman, Agent Sinclair, and the people above me. He smiled wider. They're watching you now. Ava felt a cold chill creep down her spine. She never let her guard down. Never let a target get in her head. But this was different. Because the way Calloway said it, he wasn't bluffing. And then, Ava's phone buzzed. She pulled it out. Unknown number. One text. You should have left this alone. Ava's grip tightened on the phone. She stared at Calloway. He grinned. You feel that? He asked softly. Ava stayed silent. That's fear, he said. Not for me. For what comes next. The door slammed open, Price and his agents flooding in. Hands where we can see them. Calloway didn't resist. He just smiled. As if he had already won. The next war. Ava stood outside the mansion, watching as Judge Calloway was loaded into a federal transport. The sun had started to rise, casting long shadows across the estate. Price appeared beside her. We got him, he said. Ava didn't answer. Her phone was still in her hand, still on the unknown message. Because Calloway was right. This wasn't over. The people above him, whoever they were watching her now. And the next war. It was already on its way.